Hey guys, I finally finished this build which I call Doryani's Protofist, and it was absolute pleasure to play it. Was able to clear tier 14 and 16 maps with no issues, fully juiced up, one-shotting all the rares, sometimes one-shotting Syndicate, and often even tier 14 map bosses. And I did defeat Series 5 relatively easy. This is by the way kind of a budget build, not really, but it's not an expensive, and the damage per slam, everything accounted for, is around 1.7 million per slam, and that is not even counting bigger shocks. Now I got a lot of clips to show and a lot of information to tell, so as always I have a timestamps in video description, and if you hover your mouse over the timeline on the video, you're gonna see the table of contents. It's really hard to tell all the important information in the first 2 or 3 minutes. I will talk how I made this build and also why I made this build, why I chose to play this way, and also talk about alternatives. Right, so the first thing, why Berserker and why I'm stacking armor if I could use Divine Flesh. The Doryani's touch, the slam thing, is very slow, and I wanted speed because otherwise it would feel clunky, and I know that from experience. If it's clunky, people don't like it, and I also don't enjoy it as much. And it's not to say that other classes aren't viable, it's just I wanted speed, I wanted rage, I wanted what Berserker has. Also because the last couple times I played Berserker, I was so annoyed by how squishy Berserker is, so I thought this would be a perfect time for me to try to stack armor, so that's what I did. If you haven't seen my previous video, or if you don't know how exactly Doryani's prototype works, a brief explanation. When you're using this armor, enemies have equal lightning resistance to yours, and the armor values mitigate the lightning damage taken from hits. You cannot lower enemy resistance anymore, but you can still use penetration. There are a couple of sources of lightning damage over time from monsters, so that is a big issue, because armor is not gonna mitigate that, and lightning resistance is also not gonna affect it. So basically, when it comes to lightning degen, it's gonna treat you as having 0 lightning resistance. The couple main things that do lightning damage over time are Baron's square fields and Shaper's laser. I did research a bit more what else can do lightning damage over time, and I didn't really find anything like very important. Zero's meteors and some other thing has some lightning damage over time, but it's hard to tell exactly which skill, so I fought the Zeros and I didn't really see many issues. As for Baron, it is dangerous, but if you move fast and don't stand still, it's not a big deal. Now the other part of the build is Doryani's Fist. It's a slam skill, very slow, but has big AoE and big 600% effectiveness of other damage. The skill also cannot be evaded, so you do not need a resolute technique and you can still take elemental overload, which is what I did. Also, all the unarmed base has 0% critical strike chance, so you're gonna need something else to proc elemental overload. So these are 2 core items for the build. Now, how to lower lightning resistance? There are actually quite a lot of ways to do that, but what I did is pretty simple. Immortal Flash belt, that's one of my favorite belts actually. That gives up to -25 to all elemental resistance, gives you flat physical damage taken from hits reduction, also gives flat life and mana regen, which is actually pretty useful, and a big chunk of life. The other items, I'm using Thread of Hopes, 2 of them. I could actually use the Fed, but I didn't feel like I needed it. Thread of Hope can roll up to -20 all elemental resistances, and then I made sure none of my items have any lightning resistance, and nowhere on the passive skill tree, including no endurance charges. Now there is another almost, well, let's say mandatory item, and that's a talisman, Avian Winds Talisman, which gives 50% of lightning damage from hits taken as fire or as cold damage. And that's mandatory, no questions asked, unless you have like over 100k armor. And currently I have 32,000 armor without a flask. It's nearly impossible to mitigate all the lightning damage with just armor, so this amulet is just a must. You can try to make this amulet by having Jorgen rank 2 in research, but it's pretty low chance that you're gonna actually get the right talisman and the right mod. The good thing is you don't need anything too fancy on this. Basically just try to get as much life, and then fire or cold rest, or both if you can, or elemental damage to attacks if you can, as long as there's no like lightning resistance. Like I said, I wanted to stack armor, so I actually crafted the shield myself, and it's pretty beefy shield with over 2000, basically 2300 armor, but you don't really need that much armor. If you get the amulet, it's gonna be fine, but you still want to increase your armor, unless you're using Divine Flesh, which I'm gonna talk about later. I am actually also using Storm Secret Ring, which was corrupted to remove the lightning resistance, and that is because I have Herald of Thunder linked with Curse on Hit, Temporal Chain and increased critical strike support. And I really love this combo because you don't need to worry about proccing Elemental Overload. Playing non-crit elemental build always annoyed me that you need to worry about or using some other skill to proc Elemental Overload. And this just kind of automates that and you don't need to even think about it. But instead, of course, you can use different ring, like something that would give life resistances or whatever, and use like Orb of Storm. It's up to you how you want to play. Another important thing that I had to get was a helmet enchantment for either Wrath or Determination, a reduced mana reservation, combined with the cluster jewel that I had no idea was introduced this league. The small and medium cluster jewels can roll a mod that has Determination or Wrath reduced mana reservation. So I combined that with the helmet enchantment to be able to use Wrath, Determination, Herald of Thunder with couple links, and Blood and Sand. You don't necessarily need to do that, and Determination may not even be needed if you get a Talisman. Another important cluster jewel to have is the Supercharged on the large cluster jewel. And on the small cluster jewel, Heart of Iron. Gain 10% of your maximum life as extra armor. So let's say at 6000 life you would get an extra 600 armor. I also did get a Watcher's Eye for Determination plus Wrath. I'm getting flat armor while affected by Determination, and I'm getting a bit more increased lightning damage while affected by Wrath. It's not needed, you'll do fine without it. It's just an extra bit of damage and tankiness. Now besides 2 Thread of Hopes, I also got 2, I believe, normal jewels, I mean Abyss jewels, but mostly just to cover my resistances. And of course Onslaught jewel, which by the way you can make very easily with the Augment Caster mod on Murderous or Searing Eye. Actually, I'm starting to enjoy more and more doing harvest crafts. I still dislike all the harvest mechanics except for the craft. It feels so much more satisfying and rewarding that you can actually make the item that you need, like the helmet. This helmet probably goes for like 8 exalts with the enchantment. It has a lot of life, a lot of armor, triple resistances, and you can quality and divine this to 1000 armor, so it's pretty insane. You don't need like that, but I'm just saying that it's way more fun if you can craft your own items rather than just farm currency and buy it. Back to the build, skills and links. So Doryani's Fist does not need to be linked, and I'm using Fortify, Elemental Damage of Attacks, Fist of War, and Other Lighting, which by the way is not even level 20. If you want more consistent damage, replace Fist of War with Concentrated Effect, which you can also swap to increase AoE when mapping. But personally I prefer Fist of War because it looks more epic. In the body armor I have Herald of Thunder linked with Curse on Hit, Temporal Chains, and increased critical strike support. There aren't many useful curses because you can't lower enemy resistance anymore, so I chose to go with defensive, and Temporal Chain gives me more time to dodge dangerous things. Then I also have high level Molten Shell on the left mouse button. Gives a lot of kind of effective HP and flat armor during its effect. In my boots I got Seismic Cry and Intimidating Cry linked with Second Wind and Dash. Second Wind and Dash does require a lot of dex, so I had to keep it at lower levels. In the helmet I have Determination, Enlighten, Blood and Sand, and Wrath. And in the shield I have Val, Ancestral Warchief, Multi-Totem, and Culling Strike. Now the passive tree and the leveling, I made a mistake not getting any damage while leveling through acts, so I'm not gonna provide a good leveling tree. Just use Smite, get some damage nodes, and suck it up until you can use Doryani's Fist. Now there are a couple places where you can use Thread of Hope and get something useful, but nothing that important. Just make sure that you get a reduced mana reserve if you're using both of the big auras. And then just life, elemental damage, elemental overload of course, which is actually a bit far away. For the Berserker nodes I went with the triple rage first, Rite of Ruin, and then I got I believe Warbringer and then Pain Reaver. If you want to feel like wet toilet paper, take Aspect of Carnage instead of Pain Reaver. Looking at Warbringer, I also forgot to mention that I am using Red Blade Banner Shield on the weapon swap. And I am using this only at the start of the map and at the start of the big boss fight. And that shield combined with Warbringer helps me generate 50 rage stacks instantly. And that pretty much covers the build. I will include path of building import code in video description. Now let me talk about alternative things. Ascendancy classes, Juggernaut for Unbreakable node, basically doubles your armor from body armor, and 5% reduced damage taken, that's global. but the Jugger would be slower, and that was my initial plan, but I decided to go with the Speed Berserker. Guardian, another choice. You can even build Mana Guardian. There are a couple items that give armor based on your mana reserved, and there's another item, I believe a Time Ritual or whatever, that takes 80% of your mana and use it to convert into armor. Champion is another good choice, gives flat armor, flat feast damage which gets converted into lighting, and has some pretty powerful buffs as well. Max Block Gladiator can also be used, but personally to me Gladiator just for the block seems a bit boring. Someone even mentioned that we used Chieftain for this build, which is very weird combo, but it does have some benefits. So you really can make almost anything work. It really is based on how you wanna play it and what you wanna do. Now talking about items and other alternatives, Divine Flesh Keystone from Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel is probably, well, I personally haven't tried it, but I assume it's actually better than stacking armor, because you don't need to worry about getting all the items with armor or getting determination. What it does is all elemental damage taken bypasses energy shield, which is whatever, and then 50% of elemental damage taken as Chaos damage, and then you get plus 10 to maximum Chaos resistance. So you just cap your Chaos res, get the amulet, and you basically don't need any armor to mitigate the lighting hits, because 50% of the lighting damage taken from hits is gonna be mitigated either with fire or cold resistance depending on the amulet, and another 50 is gonna be mitigated with the Chaos res. Now a couple other items, just to briefly mention them. Venturous Gamble, minus res, plus other res, life. Malachite's Artifice Ring can also be used, but you're not really getting much out of them. You just get one good res and then no life, no anything else. And Elemental Equilibrium is not even used for this build. If you are building mana version of this, Mind of the Council Helmet, attack skills have added lighting damage equal to 6% of your maximum mana. Memory Vault Helmet, gain armor equal to your reserve mana. The Formless Inferno Helmet, armor is increased by uncapped fire resistance, but you will need to find a way to get a lot more fire resistance, maybe Purity of Fire. I'm sure there are other items, but I'm not gonna mention every single possibility. So I just want to quickly mention a couple other things that do not work, or at least kind of don't work. This Thermophile Helmet, reduce cold and reduce lighting resistance, is not gonna improve your negative lighting resistance. It's actually gonna make it more positive. Tempered by War Keystone from Little Pride Jewel. While it does have a good mod, 50% of cold and lighting damage taken as fire, but it also has 50% less lighting resistance, which is also not gonna improve your negative resistance. It's gonna make it more positive. Transcendence Keystone from Timeless Jewel. Armor applies to fire, cold and lighting damage taken from hits instead of physical damage, and also -5 to all maximum elemental resistance. This may work, but it has its own drawbacks. Like if you stack armor to get extra mitigation, you're also kind of wasting, because armor no longer affects physical mitigation. So I'm not too sure about this one, if it's good idea to use it or not. Another thing that you should not be using while stacking armor, like I'm doing, is Imbalanced Guard. Essentially what it does is make small lighting and physical hits do more damage to you, and big hits do less damage. And I believe that covers everything I wanted to say. If you got any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. Also, if you got some other cool ideas regarding the Doryani's prototype or other items that synergize with it very well, share them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.